Hey guys, it's Miss Landry, and today we're learning about cognition. Now, this next unit is very important on the AP test. There's a lot of questions about cognition, so make sure that you're spending time in this unit, making sure you understand the concepts. You can compare and contrast. I have a feeling at least one of the free response questions will definitely be about cognition. So let's jump right in. So the metacognition is a very important term, and I want to make sure that we all understand the same idea about metacognition. So cognition is just the idea of thinking. So and if I say I study cognition, that means I study how humans think. Metacognition, on the other hand, is thinking about your own thinking, right? So what do I know? What do I not know? How am I going to get the knowledge? That's really important. And metacognition is becoming quite important in education. And I think, goal setting, figuring out what you need to study, that's all metacognition. So just to make sure you guys know that, I wanted to make sure you had that. So this video is going to cover 3 learning objectives for Mod 31. We're going to look at memory and discuss how it's measured. We're going to look at the human memory system specifically, and we're going to look at the difference between explicit and implicit memories. So let's jump right in. All right, first of all, you need to define memory, and there's some key terms with this. So if you look over on the left here, so what is memory? Memory is learning that, one, persists over time. So that's the first important thing. It is information that has been acquired. That's the second important thing. It's stored. That's the third. And finally, most importantly, it can be retrieved. Because if you have memories that can't be retrieved, they're not really memories, right? So the 4 key things: persists over time, it's acquired, stored, and you can retrieve it. Now, this is a short little picture of how memory works. There's a lot more to it than this, but I just wanted to give you kind of an overview. So here's the input. This might be you guys watching this video. Okay, so you're watching this video. That's your sensory memory. It's like, oh, I remember watching that video. You're paying attention to it. Yay. Okay, so it's going to go into your short-term memory. Now, unless you encode it, it will not move into your long-term memory. And we'll talk about different ways to encode and put it into that memory. And then once you have it in your long-term memory, you are able to retrieve it back to your short-term memory and put it into an output such as, oh, I don't know, a test. Okay, so that's kind of how memory works. And we're going to go into it in more detail. So I have a little tip here just to remind you that right here, this module is really important, so make sure you spend a lot of time on it. It also is really good for you guys because you're going to learn some great study tips. We've already gone over a few of them, but we're going to go into even more detail and talk about why they work. So let's first talk about the memory of faces, because I think this is just astounding. Humans are very good at recognizing faces. And in 1970, there was a study done, and participants were shown 2,500 faces on like a slideshow or pictures. So 2,500, and they held up the faces for 10 seconds. After that was done, they then had the participants look at 280 faces. Now, of those 280 faces, only a portion of them were from the original 2,500. There were also new faces that were not a part of that original. And believe it or not, the participants were able to identify 90% of the faces that were from the original slideshow. I just think that's incredible. They only saw them for 10 seconds, and yet they were still able to identify that they'd seen them before. In 2010, they repeated the study and changed it just a little bit. What they did is they showed more images for a lot less time, so 3 seconds instead of 10 seconds. And the participants were still able to identify 82% of the faces that they had seen before. I just think that's incredible. I also want you to kind of consider the next time you're looking through a crowd, looking for someone, I want you to think about the amount of processing that is occurring in your brain as you look at each face to determine if it's the person you're looking for. It is just, I think, astounding what our brain can do. Sheep are able to recognize faces, and even fish can recognize faces. I think this is cool. They actually trained fish to recognize the face that would give them food. And so they would only spit fish, these are spitting fish. They would only spit at the face that was going to give them food. They wouldn't spit at a face that they didn't recognize as a food giver or a food provider. I think that's really funny. I have a beta fish, and I don't think he recognizes me, but whatever. Okay, so how do we measure retention? Or memory. There are three key things when it comes to how do you remember. First is recall, okay? So this would be like actually pulling a fact out of your brain that you had stored. It's not necessarily recognizing something, it's just like, oh, that was this. So like, for example, if I said to you, who is the president of the United States of America? And you would bring out, boom, Joe Biden. That is like a fill in the blank question. That's called recall. That's different than recognition. Recognition is like, oh, I remember that term. That means this. So that would be like a multiple choice question. And there's a lot of bias with this one. And this is where we can talk about how to do a better job on multiple choice on the test. And then finally, relearning is really, really important. And we're going to talk about this on the next slide. But basically, the more often you practice with space, you got to leave some space, but you learn it faster and faster. And so we'll talk about that in just a sec. Humans have a really amazingly quick recognition speed. So we can recognize things that we've learned in the past. And there is, as of right now, we have not hit the limit of our learning. I would actually argue that our learning capacity is infinite. So just think about that. You're never going to run out of learning space. You might run out of focus, you might run out of energy, but you are not going to run out of the ability to learn. Speed of recall, or ID, the speed of it actually indicates your memory strength. So the faster you can recall something or identify something, the stronger that memory is. So, okay, let's move on. Hopefully that helped with that stuff. So this is the thing about studying right here, okay? Ebbinghaus was a psychologist, and he looked at, if I study this set of nonsense letters, okay, how long is it going to take me to learn it? And so what he did is he did it over a number of days. So how many repetitions did he have on day one? And he found that the minutes that it took him to learn, and he did a bunch of different ones, but it was like a very direct inverse relationship. So the more often he studied, the faster his learning became. Now, I will tell you that space or time is really important. So you have to give yourself some time between the practices. And in neuroscience, we actually call that spacing, right? So when you're studying, you want to space out that studying. Give yourself a chance to kind of forget the information and have to retrieve it again. And that struggle is what happens when you learn. If you go back to the zone of proximal development, remember I said that's like the cognitive dissonance. So that feeling of like, oh my God, I don't know it, what is it? That is when you learn. So lean into that. Okay, last thing we're going to talk about, explicit and implicit memory. Explicit is when you know that you're learning. So you are going out, you're putting effort into learning. It's going to class, it's studying, it's reading, all of that stuff. It takes effort. We sometimes call this declarative knowledge or declarative memory because you are able to declare that you know it. So for example, I think I said this before, who is the president of the United States? Joe Biden. Okay, great. That is explicit memory. Implicit memory basically skips the conscious knowledge that you are learning it, right? So I'm trying to think of examples of this. An implicit learning would be something like, recognizing who your family is. Like you didn't consciously say, okay, this is my brother, this is my sister. Like it just became a part of your knowledge. It is unconscious. It is automatically processed. It's what we call non-declarative, meaning like you can't just say like, oh, this is what I know. So we'll go over some examples of those in the practice worksheet, but hopefully that helps. That's it for this video. Thanks, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.